Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, sponsored by the National Health Association. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and today my special guest, I'm delighted to have Cyd Notter, who's a true nutrition educator who is also a very accomplished author, and we're going to talk about this wonderful book that she wrote called The Plan A Diet, which we're going to get to. She has been really cited as a entrepreneur of the year and a woman of the year by various business and state organizations. She is a certified instructor in the starch solution, food over medicine. She was trained at the Center for Nutritional Studies, and I'm so delighted to have you. Thank you for joining us, Cyd. Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association, the oldest organization in the world championing the extraordinary benefits of a whole plant food diet and healthy lifestyle, as well as water-only fasting. We believe that health results from healthful living and focus on evidence-based science that promotes the health of you and your loved ones, as well as the health of all animals and the environment. We feature experts from a cross-section of disciplines within the plant nutrition, vegan, psychological, environmental, and animal compassion sectors. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, the NHA's Director of Health Education.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, Dr. Sabatino. Is that what I should call you today?
Dr. Frank, whatever works. You know, we're going to end up being Cyd and Frank pretty much. That's going to be the Cyd and Frank show, so that's okay. It's okay. I know who I am. The audience knows who I am. That's fine. That's good enough for me. So, what I wanted to get into is that this has been such a passion for you to really teach people about whole food living and eating and the principles of living, and even combining it with your faith-based life, which we're going to get into just a little bit. So I'd love to get into a little bit of the early beginnings. What were the early drives, the aha moments that early on turned you on to, wanting to do this, to making this a part of your life?
Yeah, so back in the 1980s, the late 80s, my husband and I were invited to a couple's house for dinner who happened to be vegetarians. And we thought, oh, this is going to be different and fun to go to somebody's vegetarian house. So we went to dinner there and we found out that they were vegetarian for animal rights reasons. They had a heart for animals, and so
Right.
did we at the time. We really do have a heart for animals. And that kind of led us to explore that a little more. And we decided to become vegetarian, unhealthy vegetarians, I might add, eating tombstone pizzas and hostess cupcakes and things like that. But we had given up meat. We were still eating dairy, thinking we were doing all the right things. And of course, we weren't. So that went on for a few years. And then I was at a women's networking group, and a speaker came in. Her name was Arlene. And she was from the Wellness Forum Health Institute, Dr. Pam Popper's group. And she was an instructor for them. And she was offering a 4-week class on healthy nutrition. And I thought, well, I could go to that with my girlfriends as a night out because, I'm already eating so healthy. So
Right.
that is where my eyes were like totally open that I was not eating healthy at all. Just because I had stopped eating meat, I was still eating a lot of junk and high fat things. And that's where the lights came on for me. So I, at the time, owned a couple of art and frame stores where we did custom framing. And I would have Arlene come into my shop and offer that 4-week class on behalf of the Wellness Forum. And one day she said to me, you know what, why don't you just become certified? You know the materials better than I do. You're, helping me lead the class. You should just become certified. So I did. I went through Dr. Popper's training and became a certified health educator for her for about 6 years. And that's where it all started. My education started with Arlene, the local instructor for the Wellness Forum Institute.
So the Pam Popper information and Dr. Popper had a big influence on your life, obviously, in terms of that kind of movement to health. Were there any issues that, more severe issues, health issues that were part of your life that you were able to tie together with the way you were living and eating and see benefit? Was there anything like that happened in your life?
Yeah, so my cholesterol was creeping up. My bone health, I was diagnosed with osteopenia. I had constant colds. I'm sure looking back, it's because my immune system was horrible. But at the time, I didn't really care about that too much. I just was not focused on my health at all. I have a very dire family history with almost every disease you can think of in the mix there. And it didn't occur to me until later. The reasons for eating healthy changed for me as time went on. But after I did give up the dairy and the junk food and all that, my cholesterol reversed, my bone health went back into normal range, and my cold stopped. I haven't had a cold for years now. So those things did improve when I changed my diet the right way, because I transitioned from unhealthy vegetarian to unhealthy vegan to whole food plant-based about 15 years ago.
Yeah, well, those transitions really help us to become a little bit more sensitive to the journey that most people take. So I think that's important because
Hmm.
sometimes, when you get to a certain place, and we'll talk about this later, as you well know, you've got so much information and you want to kind of get people to change almost immediately, but it's much more important to respect where they are so they can make those transitions and those little enlightenments on their own, so to speak, over time, so that becomes very important. Aside from the nutritional part, I know that you have made the study of scripture a major part of your life for decades and a large part of your life. Was that something that you were brought up into? Was that something that started very early in your life also?
Well, I was raised in a traditional church, but I didn't get it at the time. I was raised in a church. I heard all the messages and learned all the stories, but didn't really sink into me till about my mid 30s when I started to really embrace the teachings of faith. And at the time, I was help leading a women's Bible study at the church I was in and teaching whole food plant-based nutrition. I just began to see how the two things overlapped and correlated. I mean, I never intended to write a book at all. It was never on my radar. But when I started seeing all the correlations, it was just a divine inspiration. It was laid on me that I needed to write this all down in a book. So that's how this book came about, the Plan A diet.
Yeah, we're going to
And
get into that much more in depth
yeah.
for sure. But it's an interesting journey because I know it was the same thing when Victoria Moran did her movie A Prayer for Compassion, where she really interviewed and got through all the leading spiritual paths pretty much in the world and these spiritual leaders. It's so interesting how so much of the religions, while they're teaching these principles of spiritual connection and spiritual well-being and all of that, can be so divorced from the basic information of health. And so,
Mhm.
the understanding of true compassion and what this way of living and eating is really all about, and how it is very much a part of the teachings of all the major religions, but somehow it became divorced from the way we eat and produce food and gather food and all of those kinds of things. So it's such an important piece to bring together. And it's a natural, like you say, it's really a natural evolution of things to really understand, that connection, so to speak.
Mhm. Yes, for sure. It is kind of frustrating to see so many things that are overlooked, from the pulpit when it comes to caring for our own bodies and for compassion for living animals.
Yeah, right. One of the things when we talk about these principles of living, the NHA originally, which was the American Natural Hygiene Society, came from that foundation of natural hygiene. And I don't know if you go back to an understanding of that or you go back to those early years, but the basics of that were these very simple principles of living, which of course are all the biological requirements, including healthy food, fresh air, sunshine, emotional poise, these kinds of things. And yet, it's as easy and as simple as those ideas are, they become very difficult to grasp for many people because of the glut of information and the conflict of how information is produced and spread. So I enjoyed on your website looking at how you provided tips for people to truly evaluate the information that they're encountering. What really
Mhm.
is the fake news and what isn't? Can you share a little bit of that with our audience? Because I found it to be very important and very helpful, and I think very enlightening for people who don't really think about how they're getting the information that they get. And they're just kind of accepting it because they're dealing with these false, these false prophets. I like to call them false prophets, so to speak, because they're sharing information that's not really grounded in anything other than often, their own self-interest or their own financial gain or whatever. So talk a little bit about that, because I found that to be really important and interesting.
Yeah, so I think you're referring to the article called 7 Tips to Evaluate What You Hear and Read.
Yeah, I think
And
that's part, and I
yeah,
know some of that came from the same Pam Popper organization. You've mentioned that, but I think it's worthy of discussing that a little bit with our audience, because people don't really think in those terms often.
right. And we are so nutritionally confused as a society. One day coffee's good, the next day it's bad. Whole grains are good versus whole grains are the source of every evil thing. So it's understandable that people are confused. So there are tips like assume something is false until you look into it. That's the first tip, right? And just don't blindly believe. There's a study that says if you just preface something with a new study says this, people perk up, and they just believe it because it's some study, when if you actually look at the study, it is so flawed. I have a whole file folder called sensational headlines, which I won't delve into too much right here, but some of the tips include, who is the source making the claim, right? If somebody is saying eggs are really good for you, who's making that claim? Is
Right.
it the egg industry? We want to look at independent research. That's number one. We don't want to look at industry sponsored things too much. I mean, we know that's going to be skewed for the most part. Another tip would be how is the study structured? Was it a long-term study? Was it a 2-week study? How many people were involved? What were the parameters? For example, one study that I looked at one time years ago, it said that plant-based eating really had no advantage over, a carnivore diet. And when I looked at the study, what they considered plant-based was 1 sweet potato a day.
No,
I
that's
was
funny.
like, well,
Yeah,
I mean, so
that's
you
funny.
really have to look. And then also, how did they report the terms? Absolute terms or relative terms? Those are two different ways that they can report results from studies. And in absolute terms, it's pretty much basic math, but in relative terms, they can skew the math and make something look far better than it really is. So you have to learn to discern that and just go read the abstract of a study. That's not something a lot of people want to do, is actually look at research. But if you want to get to the bottom of it, if you're being prescribed a drug or some type of health advice, you really need to investigate it before you sign on.
Yeah, it's very important. It's a very important piece. I'm here with Cyd Notter. We're going to take just a very short break to hear from our sponsor, the National Health Association, and we'll be right back. You're listening to the NHA Health Science Podcast. Dr. Frank Sabatino here. Are you ready for an extraordinary adventure that combines relaxation, exploration, and vibrant health? Then set your sails for the NHA plant-exclusive cruises. Imagine cruising through exotic destinations, savoring delectable plant-based cuisine, and engaging in rejuvenating activities, all while surrounded by like-minded individuals passionate about health and wellness. These cruises offer more than just a vacation. They offer an opportunity to immerse yourself in the NHA's principles of healthy living. And they rank incredibly high on the ratings of eco-friendly cruise lines. We all know how important our oceans are, and our cruise partner, Windstar, is fully committed to this. Join us aboard our upcoming plant-exclusive cruises and experience the synergy of health and leisure. Delight in gourmet, SOS-free meals prepared by talented chefs. Attend informative workshops and enjoy the serenity of the sea, all tailored to nourish your body, mind, and spirit. For more details and to reserve your spot on our next adventure, visit healthscience.org and click the link under travel. Don't miss this chance to indulge in a wellness retreat like no other. Elevate your well-being and make memories that will last a lifetime. And remember, your feedback matters. Please take a moment to leave a rating and a review wherever you're listening to the NHA Health Science Podcast. I'm Dr. Frank Sabatino, your host. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to the Health Science Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I'm here with Cyd Notter, the author of the Plan A Diet. And let's talk a little bit about the provocation again, a little deeper as to what was the motivation for making this book for you. Because, look, I've written, you've written. The truth of the matter is, writing a book is an arduous introspective journey, and it's not for the faint of heart, truthfully. And so, when you do that, you're really putting yourself out there, and there's a certain amount of passion that goes together with that. So let's talk about that motivation and what really drove that for you.
Well, it wasn't my idea, Dr. Frank. It was not my idea to write the book at all. I think I mentioned that. It took me 5 years to complete it because I had no knowledge of how to write a book proposal. I didn't know anything about writing a book. I had never pursued anything like that. So I had to start from scratch
Right.
and learn every step as I went. So the inspiration came, yeah, I mentioned that as I was leading a Bible study and teaching whole food plant based nutrition, I just began to see how the two subjects actually correlate and don't contradict each other. And one night I was just so inspired to write everything down that I had been thinking about that I could hardly write it fast enough. The pen was just going, I just know this was a divinely inspired thing that you are going to write a book about this. And here's your chapters. I had the chapters outlined on the first night. But then it took me, like I said, 5 years to complete. It took me 4.5 years to write the first half of the book. And then I got a little kick in the pants, divinely inspired kick in the pants. Are you going to finish the book? Because delayed obedience is disobedience, basically. So then I quit my part-time job. I was working part-time as an administrator, and I just focused on the completing the book in 2018. I declared it the year of the book, and that's when I decided it was going to get finished and published. I went to a writers conference and was made an offer at my first conference, which I'm told is unheard of typically. It usually takes a long time to find a publisher. So God just opened doors for me all the way along the line. Dr. Hans Deal wrote the foreword for my book. He didn't even know me, but through a mutual friend, just blessings were all around when it came to getting the book published.
Yeah, and I noticed that one of the motivations for you was to combine biblical principles with the principles that we teach in terms of the biological benefits of whole plant food eating and so on, to help actually to help Christians live a healthier life. And why is that so important to you, as opposed to just people generally living a healthier life? What's that target? What's that target audience for you? What's that all about for you?
Well, I help anybody that wants help, to improve their health for sure. But Christians, I think, have a deeper responsibility because they are being told in Scripture that their bodies are a temple. They need to be good stewards of their bodies, and I just feel like they ignore that a lot because they're consumed by the culture. So one of the principles that is in the book, it says, don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Well, isn't that exactly what we do with food, right? We just blindly eat all the buckets of chicken and the cheese charcuterie trays, without even thinking about it. That's the culture that we're in.
Yeah.
So I have
So
a heart for, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no. Finish your thought.
And so I have a heart for uh, my family and the faith, but I love to help anybody that is looking to improve their health for sure.
With that in mind, do you do private sessions or counseling? How does that work for you in terms of your work aside from the book? Do you do anything
Yes,
online? Do you have courses? Talk a little bit about that.
yes, I have courses and I do private coaching as well with clients from all over. It's funny that a lot of the people that come to me for coaching are actually, here's the demographic I'm noticing, women in their 50s that are actually nurses or somehow in the healthcare field. That's who's typically contacting me for help. But I do offer courses on my website. I've got a free webinar there called Three Food Mistakes That Lead to Painful Joints, Extra Pounds, and Health Problems the Doctors Aren't Solving. I have an Inflammation in Your Diet course, which I taught at our local college for several years. I have Age Well with Strong Bones course that I developed with Eileen Kupsaftis, a physical therapist. And we really delve into all the topics about bone health there, including the effectiveness of today's bone drugs. And then I have a scrumptious burgers and more cooking class that I did with 2 other chefs on my courses tab there. And I just did a food, faith, and fulfilling your purpose course with 23 other speakers, many of whom I'm sure you'd recognize from the plant-based world that gave a presentation on that topic.
That's beautiful. So in those online things, you're actually demoing how to prepare food, different things of that nature. You're actually showing, you're demonstrating those things.
In the burger class, for sure.
Yes,
Some of them are mostly slideshows and educational.
I
But
got it.
like in the bone class, I do a dairy substitutes cooking demo, for things to replace dairy. But I'm a food for life instructor too. Last November, I graduated from Dr. Barnard's program to become a food for lifer. So I'm doing a class this week on diabetes, and that'll be a cooking class here in my home.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, I notice in the book that, you've got the Plan A diet, but within the Plan A diet, you've got the Plan B diet. So let's talk about that idea that people that can't make that 100% commitment, you're giving them that opportunity to see how they can incorporate more and more of this into their lives without basically the pressure of being perfect, which I like. I like that idea that you don't have to have that pressure of being perfection. And so talk a little bit about how you marry those two concepts within the context of the book.
Yeah, so the reason it's called Plan A, because Plan A typically means our first and most beneficial choice, right? That's our Plan A.
Right.
Plan B is the transition, more of a transition plan into whole food plant-based eating. It's a 5 or 6 week transition with gradual steps toward full transition to whole food plant-based. But I'm really a stickler that every week has to have progress, because if you stay stuck, it's easy to backtrack. You're right. It's easy to go backwards if you don't have a set date in mind by which all the junk food's going to be out of the house. You're going to be totally on board. And I think 5 or 6 weeks is a really good enough amount of time to be able to do that with the right structure and the right plan if you're serious about changing.
How does the person keep track of that? How do they measure those changes?
Well, in the book, it's spelled out that this week you're going to allow yourself only this much meat if you're still going to consume meat, like
Right,
2 times a week or 3 times a week. And then each Sunday or weekend, you would plan out your next meal plan for the following week, and you would make the changes then.
So you've got a nice blueprint that they can actually follow to get them to the promised land, so to speak. Yes. And the goal is to get them into a better transition related to more closer to 100% whole plant foods and things of that nature, basically.
Exactly. And they should be able to do that within that time frame, or else I don't know if their heart is really in it if they're not doing that.
Okay. Yeah. So Cyd, let people know again, just say it out loud twice, the website where they can go to for you to follow up and really take advantage of these presentations and classes and these beautiful offerings that you're doing.
Yeah, it's just cydnotter.com. That'll take you to the website where you'll find all the courses. And I have a recipe tab there. Lots of things are there for you. Articles. I do a weekly newsletter on Wednesdays. It comes out. And I always include an article of the week, a recipe, a joke, right? I always put a joke of the week in there because we need more humor in this world, if you ask
Oh
me.
God, we need to laugh. You're not kidding.
Yeah. And then there's always words of encouragement for the week as well. So
Yeah.
today,
Go ahead. Today, what?
today for my words of encouragement for tomorrow's newsletter, I'm a big Clint Eastwood fan. So on Facebook, I follow the Clint Eastwood Facebook page, and he was asked a few years ago how he stays so active. He's in his 90s. He stays active and vibrant. And he said he gets up every morning and he goes outside and he doesn't let the old man in.
Yeah, I
And
love that quote. I've seen that. So
okay,
you're not using the one. You feeling lucky, punk? You're not using that one, right? No.
or make my day. No, but
Make my day. Yeah. No, Clint Eastwood's amazing, but it's so true, because as you know, there is so much ageism in our culture. So that, for example, without really evaluating quality of life, we have this idea that certain things are supposed to happen at certain numbers of age. And actually people wind up programming their own demise, because at 60, this is supposed to happen, 70, this is supposed to happen. And so we get so locked into this box, this prison of ageism. And it's so sad, because when you're doing the kinds of things you're teaching, you break out of all of those molds. The quality of life, your performance, your ability to experience life and participate in life is so far beyond the years of your lives that it's kind of sad that people get so attached to that kind of program breakdown, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. It is very sad. The air conditioner man that was at my house last year, he's actually expecting his heart attack because his
Yeah.
dad and his brother both had their heart attacks at 55. So he's expecting that.
Yeah. And they
I
go
thought
into
that was,
60s and 70s, and I see it here in Florida, that the entire day of the elder person is devoted to just running from one medical specialist to another. There is no living. It's just going from one doctor's office to another, which is really not what this really remarkable life is really all about. It's not the way we live an inspired life. And it's unfortunate that so much of that is still part of this culture, where you get lost in that.
yeah, that's a big motivator for me personally, is to stay out of the system as much as possible.
Yeah, I had I used to, when people come in to see a doctor, there's always like a health form. And on there, they used to ask for your age. They don't quite do that anymore. But I remember someone writing down as their age, eternal. And I love that. I said, yeah, that's the best way to answer that question, eternal. And so, we can't get lost in those numbers. One of the things with change, and you know this, and you talk about it a lot, and I'm going to address it with you right now, is that because we have old patterns that have been etched and kind of woven into our behavioral tapestry over very long periods of time, we end up creating pathways for behavior that kind of incite a resistance to change. And you
Mm.
have a very good set of tools and tips for people dealing with that resistance to change. Let's address that and give that insight, if we can share some of that insight with our audience.
Sure. In fact, that was an article that was in the NHA magazine just in the spring issue. They printed my article on the common barriers to change. And it happens to be a chapter in my book too. So over the years, I've seen 12 different reasons that I can pinpoint where people get stuck, or they have good intentions to change, but there are things that either veer them right back into the old patterns very quickly. And there are so many of them. Pain avoidance, the avoidance of pain, for example. And I don't mean physical pain, I mean anything that's perceived as a hassle. It's going to be a hassle to learn how to shop and cook differently, right? It's going to be a hassle to not go to my favorite restaurants anymore, or to not hang out with my friends who are eating cheesy pizza, at the
Right.
pizza joint. So the first sign of discomfort, they throw in the towel. But in the book, and I learned this a while ago too, is that people who are successful long term are willing to endure the short term period of discomfort that's needed to get over that hump. So that's one barrier, is the avoidance of pain. Another one, well, we know emotional eating and food addictions are big ones too, but there's also the ingrained habits that you were talking about, like how we get in those routines. Like if you're going to eat a Hostess cupcake every day at noon, and then you can no longer do that, that's a tough
Yeah, what are you what are
that's
you
a
what
tough
are you
way
gonna what are you gonna do with that noontime now? Oh my God.
yeah, yeah, got to
But
figure
it,
out
but
a,
it
ho- a
but it's so true. But this is where sometimes that transitional stuff that we talked about can have some value, because even though it's not perfect, having a creative substitution that may not be perfect, but at least is still moving you in a plant-based direction, may be a way to get over that hump. So there is some value perhaps in doing that, meaning that as much as it's not perfect, but let's suppose I have someone make some cashew cheese and I put that on a pizza. And now I've got a
Mhm.
pizza when I was used to eating pizza, but I noticed that, wow, I can still eat pizza, and it's not that stark a transition. And that will allow me to at least come into the fold of being more plant centered and now make me realize that I don't have to, because I tell people this in all the years of counseling people, I've yet to find anybody who truly loves deprivation. In fact, when I tell you not to do something, there's a part of your brain that just can't wait to do it and can't wait to do it in my face. So, we've got to find those strong options that give us some creative substitution sometimes. And that's one of the ways that does help break through those patterns and get to the other side, so to speak. So it's very important. These tools are very, very important because, when we are at a certain point, but if you think about how you evolved or how I evolved, it's kind of intriguing because if you give yourself that chance to make the kinds of changes you're recommending and sharing, you actually will get to a place that when you look back, you'll have a hard time believing that that's where you once were. And so that change really does modify and incorporate into us over time. But you do have to overcome the inertia, the pain, the discomforts that you're talking about to get to that place. So I'm so glad that you have that really discussed and outlined because it's very, very important. We know none of this is rocket science. It's very straightforward stuff. The question is, why is it so difficult for people to do it day by day? Because of all of those barriers that you're sharing and sharing in this book, so to speak.
Yeah, and family and peer pressure is another big one. In fact, I read an article recently that that's the biggest reason why people fail at this is because they're not in a household that supports it, or they're not, in a community that supports it. And I can believe that. I mean, I see a lot of houses divided when it comes to food, and it's a hard thing especially if
Yeah, it
one
is.
person, is cooking and the other one is not, and
And,
it's a tough
one of
one.
those barriers is the natural inclination for us to want to fit in. We don't want to be seen as the outcast. That's not something that kind of in an evolutionary sense provide a survival value. We needed to fit in with our tribe to be able to succeed. So there's still that part, which is why I believe you have so many people reaching out into the dim, dark corners of cyberspace to connect with anybody that's out there because we have a natural need for connection. So I think, that's why finding groups like you did that were supportive groups that, are more in line with the kinds of changes we need to make, whether it's a cooking class like you teach or, something in that regard, gives you that sense of fitting in with now a group that's more supportive of the kinds of choices and changes that are going to help us live a healthier life. And I think that's important.
Very important.
So, Sid, talk to me about I noticed you had something that was called the Wonderfully Made Ministry. Talk to me about that. I love that title. No, I love that title. So give us a little insight and a little background on what that's all about.
Yeah, well, there's a scripture that says that we are wonderfully made, and so that was a ministry I had at my previous church. I've still kind of carried it over to my current church, but I would offer weight loss challenges there and do cooking demos at church and things like that. So it's just a place to get people on board with healthy eating as much as I possibly could. And a few would show up. What it wasn't people weren't breaking down the doors to get in there. That's for sure. But but anybody that would listen, I would reach out to them and try to help in any way possible.
Do you find that there's a bigger interest for finding you online? Are you getting more and more people coming to you?
Definitely. Then in my local area,
Yeah,
yeah,
whatever.
absolutely. Yeah.
And in terms of the distribution of this book, how is it being distributed to get to more and more people so more and more people can be influenced and affected by it?
Yeah, well, signed copies are on my website for $12, and I even pick up the shipping on that. And then you can go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble.
Right.
They all have it as well.
That's all beautiful. I know that you've had connection with the National Health Association. What has that organization meant to you, and how does that relate and fit into your life?
I just love everything the NHA does. I was at the conference last year for the first time, the 2023 concert, by the way, because I did see your awesome performance there on the harmonica.
We had so much fun. That was so much fun, actually.
It was, and I see that's going to happen again this year, and I'll be there this year
This
too.
year it's going to be even bigger because people don't realize that, for example, Neil Barnard is a very accomplished guitarist that has his own band called Carbon Works. Ron Weiss from up north is a major classical pianist. So many of these docs that are coming this year are actually incredibly accomplished musicians. So I'm hoping that we can have a lot of fun with the music.
Wow.
Just like laughter, to me, music is such an essential part of our soul, our heart and soul. And so I think when you're getting all this incredible intellectual information, we need to play too. We need to have music and dance and laughter and all of those kinds of things, you
Oh
know.
man, I couldn't agree more. In fact, I've been trying to convince my husband to bring his guitar. He's a great guitarist,
There you go.
and
That's
I said, "Hey,
are you coming this year to the conference?
yeah,
Well,
he's coming."
make sure he brings it then, because we would love to have him come up and play. That would be so
Yeah.
awesome. We want to turn people on to all of the really talented people that are part of the organization. I think it's fantastic to
Mhm.
do that, you know.
Yes.
So as you go forward with all of this, what is your vision for what you would like to really be involved in as you go forward? What's next for Cyd? What do you really want to do with with your vision and your work?
Yeah, well, since I'm a fairly new Food for Life instructor, I want to go down that path a little more with online classes right now. And especially, my sister has dementia. And so I really want to focus on brain health a little more than I have been, power foods for the brain and so forth.
Right.
Um, I know you've probably heard about the Sage Circle Alliance. I'm a founding member there. That's just getting off the ground. It's a new alliance with like-minded entrepreneurs and,
Beautiful.
and that's just getting off the ground. But I'd like to evaluate where I'm spending my time and my effort. You know how that goes sometimes, Dr. Frank, where you're just spinning your wheels and you think, okay, what am I really doing and how much am I enjoying and
Right.
where do I have take it from here? I'm at that point right now because I feel like I'm really, really busy and I'm not sure I want to be this busy. So I want to
Right.
rethink my efforts and my focus.
I know exactly what you're saying. Time is the most important commodity, our time, So as we move on in life, as we do these things, are we really taking time to share that time with loved ones and to put some good energy back into ourselves and just really enjoy the moments of life without all the pressures of trying to have to feel like we're trying to accomplish something or always moving something forward. So what do you do? What does your spare time look like? What does your fun time look like for you?
My fun time? Well, we are Volkswagen people, so we're getting ready to go to the annual Volkswagen. We have a '67 microbus and
Oh,
a Carmen
wow.
Ghia.
Okay, I traveled across the country in one of those. I know that. That's my old hippie
So
days. I remember that.
really, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, we're
yeah.
hippies, yeah. So my hubby is really a great mechanic, so he restores those old vehicles.
Now that's a handy guy to marry right there. I got to tell you, to
Oh
have
man, I
your own
lucked
have
out.
your own mechanic.
Yeah, I really lucked out. I mean, I just thought he was cute. 35 years ago, I thought he was cute, and I made a play for him. And
He not only was he cute, but he had his own tool belt. You know what I'm saying? He had his own
yeah.
tool belt.
And he's a handyman. I mean, and he doesn't lay around on the couch. He's an active person. I'm like, oh man,
You found your partner. You
yeah,
found your man. That's
yeah.
cool. It's wonderful.
So
So you're involved with Volkswagens. What about physical activity, things of that nature?
yeah, we work out. Although about 10 months ago, I tore my meniscus on the pickleball court.
Oh,
So
okay.
next week, I have to go under the knife for the first time in my life. I'm going to be 69 pretty soon, and I've never been, under the knife. But this knee has got to get fixed because it's cramping my lifestyle. So I've got to
Yeah, no, you
go
got to
get
fix
that
that.
repaired.
Yeah, you got to fix that for your quality of life. That's really
Yeah.
important. So, Sid, as we kind of wind this thing down, are there any, final words or inspirational messages you'd like to share with the audience out here?
I always kind of end with life is too short to spend the last 15, 20, or even more years just focused on preventable health problems, which is what most of America does. As you mentioned, all last few years of life are just doctor appointments and, procedures and all these things. And life is too short for that. And so, if we could just get people to realize that they have much more control over their health than they ever thought possible by the food intake, that, the pillars of health. That's really the mission that I'm on, is to show people that they do not have to go down that path. It's their choice, but they do have an option.
That's beautiful. Well, I can't thank my guest, Cyd Notter, enough today for joining us. I want to thank you for sharing your heart, your work. I urge people to follow you online. You can see Cyd's website there. Don't forget, she's got this incredible book, The Plan A Diet, which you can get online at her site or on Amazon. I urge you to pick it up and follow her. And I really want to thank the people that have joined us today, because without you, we can't do what we do. And I want to thank you for being part of this really active, healthy community. And on behalf of the National Health Association, I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I look forward to being with you on the next episode of the Health Science Podcast. Cyd, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association. Thank you for joining us today and for your commitment to evidence-based health science that backs a whole food, plant-exclusive lifestyle and contributes to the well-being of all people, animals, and our environment. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino. Be sure to leave a rating and a review, and we'll see you on the next show.